Stories of Futures Past presents 5 stories featuring The Space Race, Volume 2. The Terror by Alfred Coppel. Moon Glow by G. L. Vandenburg. 0 Hour by Edmond Hamilton. They Reached for the Moon by William Oberfield. Star Mother by Robert F. Young. The Terror by Alfred Coppel. Originally published in Future Combined with Science Fiction Stories, November 1950. Narrated by Tom Trussel. The wars of nerves, the cold wars of the early 20th century, pale into insignificance beside the fear that besets humanity when Jan Carvel returns from space. From Quintus Bland's History of Mankind, Chapter 24, The Terror. These are the halcyon years. The awful goad of the terror is gone, and men can look into the sky without fear. The new colonies thrive among the low red hills of Mars, in the icy moraines of Io, Europa, and Titan. Starships are poised on the outer moons. Perhaps soon Earth will wear a diadem of stars. Yet some of the bitterness of the fear-ridden years is with us still. Forgiveness does not come easily to those who have suffered the humiliation of the terror. These are the blighted lives to remember, and the unfortunates who lived and died under the threat of annihilation from the sky. Jan Carvel's memory is accursed, for it was Carvel who brought the terror. Of the man himself, little is known. He lived and died in the first decade of the conquest of space, or in the last decade of the nationalist era, since they coincide. A few short years had passed since the first successful moon flights and the establishment of the space stations, and the tensions that had been mounting among the nations of Earth were nearing the breaking point. Lunaris was moon base then, and the launching racks were pointed back toward Earth and not toward the planets. Intense activity had turned the moon into an atomic arsenal, a focal point of all the destructive arts men had learned during and since the Second World War. The old countries, mainly the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and the United States of America, stood with weapons poised, the seemingly eternal Cold War steadily growing hotter. Moonbase was American, and the space stations were Russian. A parity of weapons had been reached, and jingoists cried for war. History does not record the exact date of Jan Carvel's departure from the Earth-Moon system. It is known that he was an American, a qualified moon pilot, and a fanatic on the subject of planetary exploration. It is also known that he boarded an experimental long-range rocket bomber without authorization and vanished from the arsenal in Tycho. Some have suggested that he did not steal the craft and that he was actually ordered on his epoch-making flight, presumably in search of militarily useful information. This is unlikely. Having reached the moon and turned it into a fortress, the United States lost interest in space travel. Carvel chafed under the restraints placed upon him and the Bureau of Security. It is therefore more than just probable that he took it upon himself to press the cause of exploration without authority or sanction. The result of this irresponsible course of action was predestined. Carvel lost his ship and his life, but he left a legacy that was to shake the world. On the evening of January 17th, 1971, some 6 years after Carvel's disappearance from Moonbase, the Pacific Radar Watch detected an approaching missile. It was tracked for routine interception, and one ground-to-air missile was actually launched at it before its erratic course identified the unknown rocket as a spacecraft in distress. Fortunately, the GTA missile was caught and neutralized before interception occurred, and the approaching spacecraft was allowed to crash in the middle of California's Central Valley near what was then the city of Fresno. Search crews found the wreckage, and it was immediately established as the experimental rocket bomber stolen 6 years before by Jan Carvel. It was badly smashed by the crash, and in addition seemed to have sustained a considerable amount of battle damage. A charred body was removed from the rocket and identified as Jan Carvel. The craft's papers, however, were in an excellent state of preservation, it being indicated that Carvel sacrificed his life to protect them. These papers, consisting of some photographs, some crudely drawn planetary maps, and a diary, were contained in a steel box addressed to the Secretary of Defense. They were rushed to this official without delay. Fortunately, he was at the time in New Washington, somewhere under the Great Lakes. Within 12 hours, a meeting was held among the chiefs of state of all the Western powers. 2 hours later, a special courier plane was dispatched to Kuybyshev, the new Russian capital beyond the Urals, and the greatest joint effort in the history of mankind was begun. The terror had come to earth. From the text of the President of the United States message to Marshal Vasily Kemperov, the Russian dictator. In spite of our differences, therefore, I urgently request that you personally authorize the dispatching of qualified Russian experts to join in the scientific council now convening here to evaluate these terrifying documents. If you desire, hostages may be exchanged to assure the safety of your personnel. From the Carvel diary. I stood on the thin snowdrifts and looked westward into the setting sun. The vastness of the silent desert was red with faintly visible plumes of sand that rode high on the icy air. Above me the sky was cobalt, and the stars shone bright and unwinking. The nearer moon rode low on the horizon, almost touching the tiny disk of the sun. I was alone, as I have been since leaving Earth. Nowhere on this world is there life, but here men might live and thrive, for there is beauty and peace. Later. I have found a rich vein of uranium ore. The ship's converter will serve to refine it. I can go on. When I return, I will build a cairn to prove that one man, at least, was sane. Later. The landing was difficult, for the heat of the rocket blast volatilized the frozen methane under me. And I let her settle. The ship dug a pit in the glacier, and now she lies half buried in the yellowish ice. I slept and fed myself and put on a pressure suit. Outside, the cold and the black sky pressed in on me, making me afraid. It is never dark here, for the planet fills the sky like a bloated yellow balloon. In the far distance, I can see a fault in the glacier, and the black rock of this moonlet shows through. I think there is silver in the rock. It streaks it in a pattern of filigree. There is little here but the challenge of keeping alive. The cold depresses me, and the giant in the sky fills me with vertigo. I shall go on. Later. A giant ahead and a giant behind. The blackness of space is all around me, and I grow used to it. I sleep and eat little now, and weightlessness is beginning to sicken me. I have come a long way. The system ahead shows promise. Later. I landed the ship on a wide plain. Rubble is everywhere. Perhaps this was once a moraine, but even the glacier is gone now. In the light of the sun I can see a rising fault like a palisade. Some low hills and a talus flank it. Bright colours are sparkling there. I think the cliff is thick with gem deposits. Later. I do not like to leave this moonlet. It is small and friendly. The air is thin, but it makes the sky blue and not black, and that makes me think of Earth. Perhaps I should be thinking of going back. The fuel is getting low, and the air in the ship is fouling. It will take a long time to reach home. Later. I will go on for a little while longer. I cannot help thinking that I will be the only one of my race to ever see these worlds. It is a godlike thought, but sad. At home there is nothing but hate and thoughts of killing. A great pity. The sky could be ours, if we were united. Later. God have mercy on me. I have seen the face of doom. The great cratered plain that spread out below me was lined with ships, great towering machines of war. We have waited too long, and now they have come. I am a soldier, a bad one, but still a soldier. I know the look of an invasion base when I see one. This is what I have seen. I will take pictures. I must return and warn them at home. They have so little time to prepare. Where have they come from? From the stars? They don't belong here. This tiny moonlet never gave them birth. Then whence have they come, and why? I am afraid. From the report of the UN Psychometric Evaluation Board. Careful study of the Coppel diary indicates that it is in fact authentic. Apparently, the loneliness of a protracted deep space flight shattered his mind, but his observations are in no wise to be disregarded for this reason. It is highly possible that the invasion base was the culminating cause rather than the effect of Carzel's obvious psychosis. Further investigation is most definitely called for. From the statement of Representative L. Louis Frank, House Minority Leader, after meeting with the administration officials. Unquestionably, the people must be told. From Pravda, official organ of the CP of the USSR. The authenticity of the so-called Coppel diary, at first doubted, has been established by Soviet experts. From the joint resolution of the General Assembly of the UN. The nations of the earth, in general concourse assembled, do hereby proclaim a state of grave emergency, and for the preservation of safety declare that the United Nations shall be considered a world government, with all necessary powers to command the massed armed forces of the member nations. The principle of unanimity among the major powers is indefinitely suspended and... From the files of the UNESCO. Fleet of 12 spacecraft under UN authority will depart from the UN moon base for Mars, there to establish a military and scientific base. Personnel will include Hansen White, astronomer, Ivan Diaglashvili, ecologist, George Washington Lee, radiologist, Consuelo Diaz, cartographer, Jules Feldman, physicist, Kendo Higashi, psychologist. From the report of the first UN Martian expedition. Radar and watch station established and garrisoned according to Directive 25-33. Bi-monthly transport services have been established between Kanalopolis settlement and Luna. Combined efforts by UNESCO and UT Armed Force personnel are being made to establish satellite stations. It is strongly urged by the project committee that more personnel be sent to Mars. However, as a serious shortage of manpower has developed due to the feverish pace of the settlement's growth, colonization may be the answer. Nowhere have the UN patrols discovered any indications of previous occupation by alien forces. Nothing resembling the invasion fleet discovered by Jan Carvel has been located. However, the cairn mentioned in the diary has been found, further supporting the authenticity of that document. Addendum in manuscript. Higashi suggests that this message found in the cairn confirms the original findings of the UN Psychometric Evaluation Board concerning Jan Carvel's sanity. From the message found written in pencil on a shipping tag in the Martian cairn built by Jan Carvel. Welcome, my brothers. From the founding directive of the new UN Planetary Colonization and Development Committee. It being established that Mars and Europa are free of alien occupation, colonization of the areas immediately surrounding the UN military and scientific bases on these planets immediately begun. From the statement of Delegate L. Louis Frank, Assembly Minority Leader, to the World Press. Simply because we have not yet been attacked, I stand foursquare on my record as a public servant. If I am returned to Assembly as delegate from the Southwest area, I will continue to support the expanding military program. We cannot rest until all the habitable planets and satellites in the solar system are bases for our mighty cruisers. Only then can we be safe from this terror. From memorandum written by K. Higashi to the Psychometric Evaluation Board's subcommittee in Canalopolis, Mars. Since I have been on Titan, both here and on Io and Europa, we have found cairns. Each time they contained the same message. Welcome, my brothers. Has it occurred to any member of the board that these messages were all written after Carvel's supposed flight in panic from the place where he spotted the invasion fleet? From a memorandum to K. Higashi, base psychologist, Titan Colony, from the Secretary of the Psychometric Evaluation Board Subcommittee in Canalopolis, Mars. It has. The pictures were faked too, were they not? From memorandum to Secretary, Psychometric Evaluation Board Subcommittee, Canalopolis, Mars, from K. Higashi, Senior Staff Psychologist, 1st UN Triton Expedition. Yes, the pictures were taken on Titan, I think. We found a plane there similar to the one in his prints. You'll recall that the plates were all fogged, conveniently, by cosmic ray radiation. A little time and touching up took care of the rest. He must have been quite a natural psychologist himself, you know. He understood that people at home would just be looking for an excuse to abandon their suicidal hysteria. What he gave them was a common enemy. Had a lot of courage, too. Must have shot up his own ship and then wrecked himself deliberately, leaving the papers and the trail of cairns. People will hate him when they find that he made fools of them, but I don't think they'll go back to the old life of before the terror. They will find out, of course. I suggest you break it to them back home. I'd like to be there to see it, but I'm too busy out here. We're building a staging base for the stars. I think Carvel would have liked that, don't you? The end. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. Moonglow by G. L. Vandenburg. Originally published in Amazing Stories, November 1958. Narrated by Tom Trussel. The Ajax 20 was the first American spacecraft to make a successful landing on the Moon. She had orbited the Earth's natural satellite for a day and a half before making history. The reason for orbiting was important. The Russians had been boasting for a number of years that they would be first. Captain Junius Robb, USAF, had orders to investigate before and after landing. The Moon's dark side was explored due to the unknown hazards involved during the orbiting process. More thorough investigation was possible on the Moon's familiar side. The results seemed to be incontrovertible. Captain Junius Robb and his crew of 4 were the first humans to tread the ashes of the long-dead heavenly body. The Russians, for all their boasts, had never come near the place. The Ajax 20 stood tall and gaunt and mighty, framed against the forbidding blackness of space. Captain Robb had maneuvered her down to the middle of an immense crater, which the crew came to nickname the Colosseum without seats. Robb had orders not to leave the ship. Consequently, the crew of 4 scrupulously chosen, well-integrated men split into 2 groups of 2. For 3 days they laboured at gathering specimens, conducting countless tests and piling up as much data as time and weight would allow. Captain Robb kept them well reminded of the weight problem attached to the return trip. Near the end of the 3rd day, Captain Robb contacted his far-flung crew members over helmet intercom. He ordered them back to the Ajax 20 for a briefing session. Soon the men entered the ship. They were hot, uncomfortable, and exhausted. Once back on Earth, they could testify that there was nothing romantic about a 35-pound pressure suit. Hamston, the rocket expert, summed it up. With that damn bulb over his skull, a man is helpless to remove a single bead of perspiration. He could easily develop into a raving maniac. Robb held his meeting in the control room. You have 8 hours to finish your work, gentlemen. We're blasting off at 0900. I beg your pardon, Captain, said Kingsley, the young man in charge of radio operation, But what about Washington? They haven't made contact yet, and I talked with Washington an hour ago." The modest cheer of approval went up for the crew members. "Well, why didn't you say so before?" said Anderson, the first officer. Rob explained, "It seems their equipment has been haywire for 2 days. They haven't been able to get through." "How do you like that?" cracked Farnsworth, the astrogator. "We're 240,000 miles off the Earth, and our equipment works fine. They have all the comforts of Earth down at headquarters, and they can't repair radio transmission for 2 days. The men laughed. "Gentlemen," Rob continued, "every radio and TV network in the country was hooked up to the chief's office in Washington. I not only talked to General Lovett, I spoke to the whole damn country." The men could not contain their excitement. The captain received a verbal pelting of stored-up questions. "Did you get word to my family, Captain?" asked Kingsley. "I hope you told them we're physically sound, Captain," said Farnsworth. "I have a fiancée that'll never forgive me if anything happens to me. What's the reaction like around the country? Have the Russians had anything to say yet? Ha, I'll bet they're sore as hell. Do you think the army would mind if I handed my resignation?" Kingsley's remark brought vigorous applause from the others. Captain Robb held up his hand for silence. Hold on. First of all, General Lovett has personally contacted relatives and told them we're all physically and mentally sound. Secondly, you'd better get set to receive the biggest damn welcome in history. The General says half the nation has invaded Florida for the occasion. "Tell them we're not coming back," snapped Kingsley, "until the Florida Tourist Bureau gives us a cut." "Kingsley, the President has declared a national holiday. We'll all be able to write our own ticket." "Yes," Anderson put in, "to hell with the Florida Tourist Bureau." Captain Robb said, "We'll be so sick of parades we'll wish we'd stayed in this god-forsaken place." "Not me," boasted Farnsworth. "I'm ready for a parade in my honor any old time. The sooner the better." "Oh, and about the Russians," said Captain Robb, smiling. "There's been nothing but a steady stream of no comment out of the Kremlin since we landed here." "Right now," said Hamston, "it's probably high noon for every scientist behind the Iron Curtain." "I wonder how they plan to talk their way out of this one," asked Farnsworth. "Gentlemen, I'd like to go on talking about the welcome we're going to receive, but I think we'd better take first things first. Before there can be a welcome, we have to get back, and we still have to work to do before we start." "What about souvenirs, Captain?" asked Farnsworth. Robb pursed his lips thoughtfully. "Yes, I guess there is a matter of souvenirs, isn't there?" The others detected a note of disturbance in the way the captain spoke. Kingsley asked, "Is anything wrong, Captain?" Robb laughed with a noticeable lack of enthusiasm. "Nothing is wrong, Kingsley. The fact is, we've taken on enough additional weight here to give us some concern on the return trip." He paused to study the faces of his men. They were disappointed. "But," he added emphatically, "I seem to remember promising something about souvenirs, and I guess a man can't travel 500,000 miles without something to show for it. I'll get together with Hamston and work out something. But remember the weight problem. First trouble we encounter on the return trip, and a souvenir will be our number one expendable." The crew was more than happy with Robb's compromise. Robb went into a huddle with Hamston, the rocket expert. When he emerged, he informed the crew that each man would be permitted one souvenir which must not exceed 2 pounds. He allowed them 4 hours to find whatever they wanted. The men got back into their pressure suits and left the ship. Captain Junius Robb stood outside the Ajax 20. His eyes scanned the great circular plain that stretched for 50 miles in all directions. The distant jagged rises of the crater's rim resembled the lower half of a gigantic bear trap. The moon in all its splendor. Wasn't there a song that went something like that? The moon in all its splendor, or lack of it, was Robb's mute opinion. The scientists, as usual, were right about the place. To all intents and purposes, the moon was as dead as the Roman Empire. True, they had found scattered vegetation. There were even 2 or 3 volcanoes spewing carbonic acid, but they spewed it as though it was life's last breath. Nothing more. The fires of the moon had given way to soft, lifeless ashes. Rob was glad he had allowed the men to look for souvenirs. After all, it wasn't a hell of a lot to ask for. A man could cut press clippings and collect medals and framed citations, and probably these things would impress grandchildren some day. But it seemed that nothing would be quite as effective as for a man to be able to produce something tangible, an authentic piece of the moon itself. Captain Robb had always tried to be a humble man. He recalled an interview held by the 3 wire services a week before takeoff. One of the reporters had asked the obvious question, "Why do you want to go to the moon?" He could have given all of the high-sounding, aesthetic reasons, but instead his answer was indirect, given with a modest smile. "To get to the other side, I guess," he had told them. Like the chicken crossing the road, that was how simple and uncomplicated Rob's life had been. But now he stood, his feet spread apart, beside his mighty ship, 250,000 miles away from home. He was the first, and he could not fight back the feeling of pride and accomplishment that welled in him. The word first in this instant conjured up names like Balboa, Columbus, Peary, Magellan, and Junius Robb. The crew members deserved the hero's welcome they would receive. They could have the banquets, parades, and honorary degrees, but it was Junius Robb who had commanded the flight. It would be Junius Robb's name for the history books. He wouldn't be needing any souvenirs. Kingsley and Anderson were the first to return. They both carried small leather bags. Inside the ship they revealed the contents to Robb. He examined them carefully. Kingsley had found an uncommonly large patch of brownish vegetation. He had torn away a sizable chunk and placed it in the bag. "Who knows," he shrugged. "I might be able to cultivate it." "Or let it play the lead in a science fiction movie," snapped Anderson. The first officer's bag contained a piece of one of the smaller craters. It had no immediately discernible value. It was Anderson's intention to polish it up and put some kind of a metal plaque on it. 4 more hours went by, and there was no sign of Farnsworth or Hampston. Robb began to worry. He'd never forgive himself if anything happened to either of the 2 men. He waited another half hour, then ordered Kingsley and Anderson to put on their pressure suit and go look for the 2 missing crew members. The search was avoided as Farnsworth entered the ship, dragging Hampston behind him. "What happened?" yelled Robb. Farnsworth began the job of getting out of his pressure suit. "I don't know. Hampston's sick as a dog. I checked every inch of his suit and couldn't find anything out of order." Robb bent over the prone rocket expert. Hampston looked up at him with half-opened eyes and an insipid grin on his face. He mumbled something about a fine state of affairs. They removed Hampston's suit and placed his limp frame on a bunk. Robb examined him for 40 minutes. He reached the curious conclusion that Hampston was fit as a fiddle. The rocket expert fell asleep. Robb and the rest of the crew prepared to blast off. The Ajax 20 thrust itself through space, halfway back to its home planet. The excitement of her crew members grew with every passing second. In his concern over Hampston, Farnsworth had forgotten about his souvenir. He now opened his bag and displayed it before the others. "What is it?" asked Kingsley. "Dust," was Farnsworth's proud reply. "What the hell are you going to do with dust?" "Maybe you don't know it, but this is going to be the most valuable dust on the face of the earth. Do you realize what I can get for an ounce of this stuff?" "What's anybody want to buy dust for?" "Souvenirs, man, souvenirs." Farnsworth asked to see what Kingsley and Anderson had picked up. The 2 men obliged. For the next hour, the 3 men and Robb discussed the mementos and their possible uses on Earth. Then Anderson said, "I sure wouldn't turn down about a gallon of good Kentucky whiskey right now." Robb laughed. "We did enough sweating on the way. You wouldn't want to sweat out the trip back on the belly full of booze." "That may be a better idea than you think it is, Captain." The four men turned to find Hamston sitting up on his bunk. "Hamston," Rob exclaimed, "how do you feel?" "Terrible." "What happened to you?" asked Kingsley. Hamston stared at each man individually. He took a deep breath and his cheeks puffed up as he let it out slowly. "Well, I guess you'd better know now." Rob frowned. "What do you mean?" Farnsworth and I separated after we got about 4 miles from the ship. I thought I saw something that looked like a cave. I figured I might find something interesting there to take back with me. So I told Farnsworth I'd keep radio contact with him, and off I went. "Did you find a cave?" Rob wanted to know. "No, it was just a big indentation in the wall of the crater. I threw some light on it and found it to be 10 or 15 feet deep." He paused, as though not sure of what to say next. "So?" "So that's where I found my souvenir." "Well, let's see it," said Anderson. Hamston opened his leather bag. The object he removed rendered the crew weak in the knees. He said, "We can have that drink, Anderson, but I don't think we'll enjoy it." He poured them each a shot from a half-filled bottle of vodka. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. 0 Hour by Edmond Hamilton, writing as Alexander Blade. Originally published in Imagination, April 1956. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Dad had already gone when Bobby got up. This disappointed Bobby a little, but then he remembered this was the big day. Naturally, Dad would get over to the project early, and at 4 o'clock, Bobby shivered deliciously at the thought of it. He ate his breakfast in silence, with Mum across the table drinking a cup of coffee and looking at a fashion catalogue. He was glad she was occupied, because he didn't want to talk. Not today, he didn't. Might spill something secret. Might even let out the big secret. That would be terrible. Of course, all things were secret at Buffalo Flats. So secret, top scientists like Dad didn't even discuss them with wives like Mum. And wives like Mum never asked. So it was really something to sit there eating breakfast, knowing that, today, Dad was going to rocket to the moon. And with Mum not even knowing the lunar project was in the works, so naturally not dreaming that he was going with Dad. The thrill was overpowering. Maybe they would have radio communication after they got there, and he would call back and say, "Hello, Mum, guess where I am? On the moon with Dad." And Mum would say, "Why, Bobby, scaring me to death like this. I was looking all over for you," sounding very angry, but not being really angry after all. Because maybe Dad would cut in and say, "Yeah, he's right here with me, dear. What do you think of this boy of ours?" Bobby gulped the last of his cereal so he could go outside and wriggle for joy. And he got up from his chair. Mum said, "And what's your plan for today, young man? Davy Crockett or Buck Rogers?" Bobby had a quick thought, a sudden temptation. Why not give Mum a hint? Why, he could even tell her, and she still wouldn't know. Then later, after he was gone, she would remember back and say, "That boy, when he tells you something, he really means it." Bobby smiled and said, "I think I'll go to the moon today." Mum smiled too, and went back to her fashions. "Well, see to it your fuel mixture is correct." "I'll check it, and Mum, I might not be home for lunch." "Where will you be?" "Oh, I don't know." "Well, mind your manners and say thank you when you leave." Mrs. Kendall, still smiling, watched Bobby dash out into the yard. Living on a restricted government area had one compensation at least. You didn't have to worry about your children. 4 dozen families, all with offspring, trapped behind 10-foot patrolled fence. Here, nobody worried about the children. They came and went, and at noon a mother fed whatever number happened to be in the house at the time. Mrs. Kendall usually drew 6 or 7. It would be a relief to dodge the chore for one Saturday. Out in the backyard, Bobby fussed around his space rocket a little, tightening a screw here, hammering in a nail there, just until he could slip away without Mum noticing his direction. It wasn't a bad rocket at that, he thought. 6 feet long with 2 seats and a keen instrument panel. But kid stuff, of course. After he found the way in through the sewer, he hadn't paid any more attention to his own ship. He could see Mum through the window, back in her book, so he went casually out through the back gate and turned left, kicking at pebbles as he sauntered along and trying to look as though he had no place to go. Had to be careful. Didn't want to bump into any of the other kids today either. The way in through the sewer was at a place behind Laboratory B. There was a kind of an alley there that nobody ever walked through, and then this round lid you could lift up and look under, and a ladder you could climb down. Bobby hadn't dared to go down at first, but after thinking about it overnight, his curiosity won out, and he went back and ducked down into the lower level. He called it a sewer, because of sewers being underground, but this place was clean and had bunches of wires strung in every direction and faint little lights you could see by. Bobby went further and further every trip he took, never telling anybody because you weren't supposed to talk about things at Buffalo Flats, not even to the other kids. Then he found the big drome where they were building the rocket. It was so sleek and beautiful and shiny that he just stared at it, up through the grating in the floor that was for air circulation or something. He didn't know it was the moon rocket at first, not until he had gone back several times to peek up at it, and then one day 2 scientists came walking along right in front of his nose. One of them was Dad. Bobby almost called out, but he caught himself and just listened to them talking. This was the first time his conscience bothered him about going underneath the drome. He thought about it a lot, whether it was the right thing to do, and while he was never able to still his conscience completely, he quieted down by saying he really wasn't doing any harm, because he'd never told anybody what he saw. He learned the rocket was going to the moon by listening to Dad and the other scientists talk when they thought they were alone, and it was funny, because even there they spoke in low voices and didn't give too much away. He had known now for 3 days that at 4 o'clock the roof would open, and the drome would be turned into a blast pit, and the rocket would shoot out through space to the moon. That was all he did know for sure. None of the men had said who was going on the first trip to the moon. Nothing had been said on that subject at all, but Bobby knew Dad would go. He would have to. After all, Dad was the second biggest scientist at Buffalo Flats, second only to Schleimer himself, and Professor Schleimer was very old and certainly wouldn't make the trip. That left Dad. Dad would just have to go in order to run the rocket. There probably wasn't anyone else smart enough in the whole place. The idea of going himself had been born the previous day, when he found a larger grating in the floor near the rocket and realized, if he was very careful, he could climb out of the sewer and duck into the rocket when nobody was looking. Once inside, he was pretty sure he'd find a place to hide until blast-off. All the men would probably be strapped in bunks, but if he found a place he could wedge himself in, he didn't think he'd get hurt. Then, halfway to the moon, he would come out and find Dad, and would he be surprised! At first, thinking about it, he'd been scared, but after he realized how proud Dad and Mum would be, he made up his mind. Now, crouched beside the grating near the ship, he waited while 2 men, technicians in white overalls, walked by. One of them said, "Well, whatever happens, she'll make a big splash." "You said it. Hope the brains know what they're doing." That made Bobby mad. Who said Dad didn't know what he was doing? Dad was just about the smartest scientist in the world. After the two men left, he waited a long time. He heard voices, but no one came in sight. Taking a deep breath, he opened the grating and got out. It was only 4 steps to the open port of the rocket. There was a little ramp they'd used to roll things in, and Bobby's feet touched it but lightly as he jumped into the ship. He found himself in some kind of a storeroom. It would be a good place to hide, all right. It was full of aluminium barrels, all the same size. He found a space between 2 rows and sat down and got his breath back. It was very quiet around him. Scary quiet. But he set his lips firmly. He was going to the moon with Dad. John Kendall was a little late that night. He kissed his wife and said, "Well, did you see the big skyrocket?" "How could I miss it, darling? Your supper is in the oven." "I could use a martini first." "Coming right up." While Myra fixed a drink, John lay back in his easy chair and closed his eyes. "We'd hoped to stage a little ceremony at the launching, but Washington said no." "The Russians?" "The Eastern Coalition. It was a race. That's why it had to be so secret. Washington said, 'Light the fuse and fire the thing.'" "Is it still hush-hush?" "No, not between us at least. We fired an explosion rocket at the moon. It will hit in about an hour, and telescopes will show a big purple spot when our explosives go off and throw dye all over the place." Myra handed him a dry martini. "I see. Lots of fun, no doubt, but what's the purpose? 4th of July on the moon?" "Oh, no. If the experiment is a success, the next rocket will carry men instead of a bomb." Myra went to the kitchen to see about supper. John called, "Where's Bobby? In bed, I suppose." Myra didn't hear, and John set his drink down and moved toward the bedroom. Maybe he was still awake. Bobby rolled over. His eyes popped open. "Dad, I thought you went to the—" John Kendall sat down on the edge of the bed and tousled his son's hair. "No, son. It's the old terra firma for me. Did you see the rocket blast?" "Uh-huh. It was really something. It went to the moon, didn't it?" "That's right." Kendall smiled and thought. "Try to keep a secret from the kids. It just can't be done." "How's your moon rocket coming along, son?" "Pretty good. Gee, Dad, as long as you didn't go, I'm glad I didn't go either." "You were planning to make the trip also?" "Uh-huh. I got into the rocket and was all set, but I got to thinking about Mum, how one of us should stay and take care of her in case anything happened." "Smart thinking, son. Now you get to sleep. I'll have a little time tomorrow. We'll play some ball." "That will be keen." John Kendall smiled as he left the bedroom. Kids were wonderful. Give them a few old boards and a steering wheel, and they could build a ship to fly to the moon. What a wonderful dream world they lived in. Too bad they had to grow out of it. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. They Reached for the Moon by William Oberfield, originally published in Imagination Stories of Science and Fantasy, November 1951. Narrated by Tom Trussel. They took 1,000 days to build the great gleaming monster, and another 200 to groom it for its trip around the moon. All this they did with an air that made a trip to the moon seem quite natural and sure, even though 3 other rockets had gone before and not one had returned. "This one will," they said, as though convincing themselves. But they were not sure. They were stubborn, perhaps proud, but not sure at all. All the world had watched 3 other such rockets with men in them go screaming off moonward. All had waited for them to return, and all had seen nothing come back down from the sky, not even a small scrap of metal. This one might return, and if it did, the men in it just might be alive to tell.
But that was not being sure. "A military base on the moon," the leaders had cried. And that had been that. Robot rockets had gone first. They had landed on the moon. They could do that, but they could not establish the desired base. So men had started on a round trip around the moon, first to prove that men could do it. The only thing they proved was that whatever goes up need not come down. Now the fourth rocket waited, leaning over against its heavy launching rack, ready to face whatever unknown danger lay out there beyond. On a certain night, a night long appointed, one overshadowed with heavy clouds that brought a threat of rain, there were lights about the rocket and in the low concrete buildings that cowered back a ways from the upright metal giant. Around the base of the rocket, men scurried like ants, making last-minute preparations and seeing that everything was just so and not being satisfied with good enough. In one building, a little nearer the rocket than the others, two men lounged, talking of the coming trip and other things that concerned last night's women, and smoking endlessly, the last smokes they would have for 4 days. These men would soon climb into a long metal thing and try to do what others had failed to do. In other buildings were men with great ideas held firmly in their minds, doing things with pencils and paper and adding machines. These checked back over figures and charts, knowing all the time that everything was flawless, but checking just the same. Some were army men, and some were not. The feeling that seemed to grow over everything was one of waiting and suspense, and one might know without asking, without seeing the many glances at watches and clocks, that it would soon be time. Strangely, the two men waiting and speaking mostly of wine, women, and general good times, knew very little of the import of what they were about to do. In fact, they had no real concept of even the size of the earth, let alone the magnitude of space, the moon, and the stars. This, however, was as intended. The men who had gone in the other rockets had been scientists, greatly skilled men of high IQs. So the brass and the brains had gotten together and reasoned, and pooled data, and considered statistics, and finally decided that the strain of being completely out of one's natural element, exposed to the terrible thought-twisting blankness of space, might be greater than had been supposed, and the high-strung, sensitive, sometimes slightly neurotic minds of the highly intelligent might well be expected to crack under the strain. This, of course, was at most a poor explanation, but it served at least as an excuse for retaining the great minds and sending those more expendable. These, not knowing, would probably consider the whole thing nothing more than a slightly unusual adventure. So when the army officers came, very stiff and orderly, and opened the door to the little building, the two men came out laughing and pushing at one another playfully. They followed the little group of officers toward the gleaming rocket, not at all worried, like men going off for a happy spree at some local bar. The rocket seemed to loom higher as they neared it. It was now bathed in the light of many spotlights, reflecting back the light in such a way that one might think he would go blind if he looked too long. Only when they stepped onto a platform with two of the higher officers and were lifted swiftly upward, did they give a thought to what was going on. The platform halted its climb just below a round hole near the nose of the rocket. "You men should know exactly what you are to do," said the higher officer, "and that is not much. You are not, under any circumstances, to touch anything until you near the moon. Up to that time, The rocket will be guided by at least one control station here on Earth." The officer paused and tried to see understanding in the eyes of the two. He was one of those who did not agree with sending such dense fellows. "You have been trained for months," he continued, "to read a few instruments and to perform the fairly simple tasks required to take you around the moon and start you back. Do only what you have been taught. Do nothing more. You must remember that certain conditions near the moon which interfere with radio reception and which we have been unable to overcome will put you entirely on your own until you start back." One of the men, a little uncertain, acted as if he wished to speak. "Yes," said the officer. "Didn't they send rockets once without no men in 'em at all?" he asked. "Then how come they can't do like we wasn't even there?" "My dear fellow," said the officer, perplexed, "to aim and fire a rocket at so near and so large a target as the moon is a simple matter. To guide one around the moon in a precise orbit is a matter entirely different." He paused. "Any more questions?" "No, sir," said the men. "Very good." The officer seemed glad there would be no further conversation. "In you go now." The men went into the opening, helped by the officers, like olives being put into a bottle. In a moment the officers had gone, and a cover had been placed into the opening and screwed firmly into place. There was lead glass, very heavy, in the windows of all the buildings. The thick cement walls and doors were covered with sheets of lead. Inside the most distant buildings, at the small windows, men stood with black looking-glasses over their eyes, watching. Each time a rocket went into space, it was exactly thus. The atomic drive was new and not completely perfect. Always there was a chance that something might go wrong. The radiation grids could go haywire. There could be an explosion, or the ship could falter and slip on the way up. So the men waited and watched in the little buildings, with fingers crossed, hoping for the best. Now it was very quiet. The spotlights had been extinguished because every bit of electric power was needed to start the amazing rocket motor. Only enough was spared for lighting, where needed, in the buildings and for the PA system. And over the PA system, voices spoke. "Trackers ready? Trackers ready. Control station ready? Control station ready. Radio room, report. Radio reporting. All tracking and control stations reported or relayed in." There was a pause. Then, "Stand by." The silence seemed to grow even more intense. The ticking of clocks and watches could be heard. The unreal atmosphere of a dream settled over the clustered buildings on the plain. "Activators!" Out on the plain, the rocket came to life. It surged and clattered against its launching rack, nearly leaping, pawing the ground with hot explosive blasts. Now it became a living wild thing, a bound monster surging against its chains, fighting to be free and away. The voice, in a short while, came again, a little strained. "Ready, ready, ready, rocket away!" The great gleaming monster lifted up from the plain, bellowing its defiance of space with the voice of 10,000 waterfalls. It rode up from the center of a tremendous flower of glowing dust on a pillar of intense blue flame, slowly gathering speed, like a whale rushing up from the depths of the ocean. For a while it lighted up miles of rolling plain with its glare, and sent its thunder out to crash against distant hills. Then it was gone beyond heavy clouds, leaving only a smear of light above, and a hollow, boiling rumble, muted by distance. In the thin, cold air above the clouds, the rocket pointed its sharp nose eastward. It raced across the sky, a blue streaking and a stuttering scream. It crossed a nation with amazing speed and moved over the Atlantic. In an instant the moon and the stars were gone, and the rocket was looking at the sun. Clear morning fled away in fear of this flaming beast, and was noon within minutes after sunrise. In an hour the night returned, the stars and the moon with it. "Brother, we're in!" cried Private First Class Walter Jones in the head of the rocket. The babes will bob us after this. Real big shots, that's us. The men in the moon. Ha! "If we get back," Private Robert Moore shouted over the roar. "Remember, we got to get back yet." "Chicken!" shouted Jones. "Chicken's what you are!" "Oh, yeah? So what happens to them guys what went before?" "Nuts to that," Jones sneered. "I hear there's lots of places up in space we don't know nothing about, where there's maybe a lot of nice babes and buildings made out of gold and stuff like that." "Scientists don't go much for babes," Moore said. Jones kicked back in his seat, roaring laughter. "Ha! Don't kid yourself, son. Anyway, so what? So they get a chance to be kings or something on account of being from Earth. What do? They stay and be kings, Natch." "It ain't for me," said Moore moodily. "I know babes on good old Earth, and who wants to be king?" "That's what I'm telling you," Jones shouted. "We ain't got no worry at all. All we got to do is not let them guys up there sidetrack us." "I hope you're right," said Moore. They fell silent, looking down at the reeling earth. On the ground, 200 miles below, at every tracking and control station around the world, men worked without pause, trying to make their tired minds outrace a speeding rocket. Nightside and dayside, messages flashed through the ether. They reported in position, time, corrections made, passing the rocket quickly from one to another like a hot potato. On its last lap around the world before flinging itself moonward, the rocket screamed across the much-worn boot of Italy. It climbed swiftly up the sky of the Holy Land and plunged down in the east, drawing a blue pencil line across the heavens that faded slowly. At last it turned upward, and breathing streamers of fire and light shot into airless space, a silver arrow gone from the bow and dead on its mark. "It sure seems quiet," said Moore. They looked through the glassite port into the great distances. "Quiet and empty. Yeah." "Do you feel different?" Jones asked suddenly. "I don't know. Maybe, in a way." "Like you can think a lot better?" "Something like that," Moore said. They sat and thought about it. The rocket was now 1,500 miles up, climbing swiftly. "For one thing," Moore said, "we are lighter. What do they call it? Gravity. Gravity is less." "I don't like it," cried Jones. "I don't like it at all." "What?" Moore looked at him. Jones stared back, frightened. "It's nothing like I thought it would be. Maybe we'll get so light there won't be anything left. Where is everything? It's so empty it don't make sense. Something's wrong, Bob. Let's try to turn back before we die like the others. I don't want to die. I want—" Moore reached over and slapped the other's face hard. Jones focused glassy, unsteady eyes, surprised and hurt. "Why did you do that?" "You called me yellow a while ago," Moore said, disgusted. "Now it's you who are acting like a woman or a child. You would really kill us, trying to turn back at this velocity." "I'm still afraid," Jones said, but not wildly. "I don't know what's happening to me. I can remember things that happened years ago, things I hardly noticed. I'm starting to understand things I never understood before, and some of the things are hard to take." "Don't you think I feel it too?" Moore looked out at space in a new way, understanding. For a while there was silence, a little strained, while the rocket sped another 1,000 miles. After that it was not so strained. It was more an atmosphere of concentration, of two men thinking within themselves. There was no more fear. "So this is what happened to the others," Moore said finally. "But what do we have to fear?" Jones shrugged. "I'm not afraid any more, but maybe I should be." He leaned back and looked at Moore. "Have you any idea what is happening to us?" "I'm not sure," Moore frowned. "It's as if some great obstacle to clear thinking has been removed. Have you noticed how we have been speaking? Our memory has so improved that we are able to use words we may have seen or heard used only a few times. And the new sharpness of mind that enables us to use these words properly also makes us able to grasp quickly new ideas and to reason logically. As to what causes the change, I do not know." "I've been thinking about gravity," said Jones, reflecting. "It seems to me that the change in mental power is just about inversely proportioned to change in gravity. That might, in some way, have something to do with it." Moore sighed, frowning. "You may be right, but granting that you are, we are still in the dark as to the nature of the danger we must face." "I think I'm beginning to get some idea," said Jones. "I wouldn't be surprised if my first crude idea, in a way, was very nearly right." Moore showed surprise. "You still think those other found someone out here who made them kings or some such?" He laughed. "Not exactly," Jones said, "but there may be even stranger things." And he would say no more. At 50,000 miles, they had lost all thought of danger. They spoke of space and the unseen medium that must be there. After forming their only logical conclusion about the nature of this, they passed on to matters of relativity and the nature of time and of life itself, understanding each in its turn. They became so absorbed in conversation they did not even notice when they stopped talking and conversed in pure thought. Not even did they realize that a golden glow had come to their faces and bodies that was not simple light. And they were content in knowing they would never return to earth, knowing also that they would not die. The rocket carried them 100,000 miles through space before it happened. "There is someone behind us," Jones said simply. They looked and beheld a man standing in space. He was hardly a man any more, as men are called, but one like themselves. A golden glow seemed to blend with him. He smiled. "Welcome." "We've been expecting you," said Moore, smiling in return. "Your voice, your thoughts reached us. We know you are one of those who came out in a rocket before us, but your name is not clear." The being seemed mildly surprised. Then he laughed, a thing that was as the tinkle of small bells, as the dew of a cool meadow before the rising sun, or the joyous song of a nightingale. "I am one of them," he said, "and all of them. We who have overcome the chains of gravity, who have become one in thought and find it impossible to do otherwise, have no need for individuality." "But you have a body," said Jones. "Surely that gives you some sort of individuality." "Yes, if one's mind is bound, controlled by matter. But the mind working without resistance is a perfect machine. It is able to control matter in every respect. We take this form or that form as a matter of expedience." "We have reasoned that all this is due to release from gravity," Moore reflected. "But we do not understand completely. Will you tell us?" "Even those on Earth know that gravity hampers the mind," the being said. "This they have learned through observation of mental factors in relation to the gravitational pull of the sun and moon. But look into my mind, and you will see more clearly." They looked, and saw a copper disc turn before a powerful magnet, and they saw resistance caused by electric currents induced in the copper, so that a great deal of power was required to turn the disc, even slowly. This, the thoughts indicated, was a principle well known to those yet on earth. Next came the relationship between magnetism and gravity, clearly demonstrated. They then saw a human brain locked in the powerful embrace of gravity, and the tiny pulsations and complex motions, the processes of thought, were, as with the disc, sluggish, in large portions not even present. They watched a brain come alive as gravity decreased. It bulged, the tempo of motion rising, parts long dormant surging with power. They saw, and they understood. "If only we could go back and help them," sighed Jones. "If we could overcome all that gravity on earth." Again the being smiled its kind smile. "If you returned, it would be to the same mental prison. You could not, in your crude manner, convince them." The two knew what they must do, even before the being spoke again. "The others, the rest, wait beyond the light of universes," he said. "We think, we learn. Soon we will find a way of helping those on earth, and we will return. Come with me." They replied together, "We are ready." On the dark side of the moon, where they had been projected by identical velocities, lay the battered wrecks of 4 gleaming rockets, and in all the wreckage, among all the bits of twisted metal, there was not a single drop of human blood.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. Star Mother by Robert F. Young. Originally published in Amazing Stories, January 1959. Narrated by Tom Trussel. That night her son was the first star. She stood motionless in the garden, one hand pressed against her heart, watching him rise above the fields where he had played as a boy, where he had worked as a young man, and she wondered whether he was thinking of those fields now, whether he was thinking of her standing alone in the April night with her memories, whether he was thinking of the verandahed house behind her, with its empty rooms and silent halls, that once upon a time had been his birthplace. Higher still and higher he rose in the southern sky, and then, when he had reached his zenith, he dropped swiftly down past the dark edge of the earth and disappeared from sight. A boy grown up too soon, riding round and round the world on a celestial carousel, encased in an airtight metal capsule in an airtight metal chariot. Why don't they leave the stars alone, she thought. Why don't they leave the stars to God? The General's second telegram came early the next morning. Explorer 12 doing splendidly. Expect to bring your son down sometime tomorrow. She went about her work as usual, collecting the eggs and allocating them in their cardboard boxes, then setting off in the station wagon on her Tuesday morning run. She had expected a deluge of questions from her customers. She was not disappointed. "Is Terry really way up there all alone, Martha? Aren't you scared, Martha? I do hope they can get him back down all right, Martha." She supposed it must have given them quite a turn to have their egg woman change into a star mother overnight. She hadn't expected the TV interview, though, and she would have avoided it if it had been politely possible. But what could she do when the line of cars and trucks pulled into the drive and the technicians got out and started setting up their equipment in the backyard? What could she say when the suave young man came up to her and said, We want you to know that we're all very proud of your boy up there, ma'am, and we hope you'll do us the honor of answering a few questions. Most of the questions concerned Terry, as was fitting. From the way the suave young man asked them, though, she got the impression that he was trying to prove that her son was just like any other average American boy, and as such just didn't happen to be the case. But whoever she opened her mouth to mention, say, how he used to study till all hours of the night, or how difficult it had been for him to make friends because of his shyness, or the fact that he had never gone out for football, whenever she started to mention any of these things, the suave young man was in great haste to interrupt her and to twist her words by re-questioning into a different meaning altogether, till Terry's behaviour pattern seemed to coincide with the behaviour pattern which the suave young man apparently considered the norm, but which, if followed, Martha was sure, would produce not young men bent on exploring space, but young men bent on exploring trivia. A few of the questions concerned herself. Was Terry her only child? Yes. What had happened to her husband? He was killed in the Korean War. What did she think of the new law granting star mothers top priority on any and all information relating to their sons? I think it's a fine law. It's too bad they couldn't have shown similar humanity toward the war mothers of World War II. It was late in the afternoon by the time the TV crew got everything repacked into their cars and trucks and made their departure. Martha fixed herself a light supper, then donned an old suede jacket of Terry's and went out into the garden to wait for the sun to go down. According to the timetable the General had outlined in his first telegram, Terry's first Tuesday night passage wasn't due to occur till 9:05, but it seemed only right that she should be outside when the stars started to come out. Presently they did, and she watched them wink on, one by one, in the deepening darkness of the sky. She'd never been much of one for the stars. Most of her life she'd been much too busy on earth to bother with things celestial. She could remember, when she was much younger and Bill was courting her, looking up at the moon sometimes, and once in a while when a star fell, making a wish. But this was different. It was different because now she had a personal interest in the sky, a new affinity with its myriad inhabitants. And how bright they became when you kept looking at them. They seemed to come alive, almost, pulsing brilliantly down out of the blackness of the night. And they were different colours too, she noticed with a start. Some of them were blue, and some were red. Others were yellow, green, orange. It grew cold in the April garden, and she could see her breath. There was a strange crispness, a strange clarity about the night that she had never known before. She glanced at her watch, was astonished to see that the hands indicated 2 minutes after 9. Where had the time gone? Tremulously she faced the southern horizon and saw her Terry appear in his shining chariot, riding up the star-pebbled path of his orbit, a star in his own right, dropping swiftly now, down, down, and out of sight beyond the dark wheeling mass of the earth. She took a deep, proud breath, realizing that she was wildly waving her hand and let it fall slowly to her side. Make a wish, she thought, like a little girl, and she wished him pleasant dreams and a safe return, and wrapped the wish in all her love and cast it starward. Sometime tomorrow, the General's telegram had said. That meant sometime today. She rose with the sun and fed the chickens, fixed and ate her breakfast, collected the eggs and put them in their cardboard boxes, then started out on her Wednesday morning run. My land, Martha, I don't see how you stand it with him way up there. Doesn't it get on your nerves? Yes, it does. Martha, when are they bringing him back down? Today. It must be wonderful being a star mother, Martha. Yes, it is, in a way. Wonderful and terrible. If only he can last it out for a few more hours, she thought. If only they can bring him down safe and sound. Then the vigil will be over, and some other mother can take over the awesome responsibility of having a son become a star. If only. The General's third telegram arrived that afternoon. Regret to inform you that meteorite impact on satellite hull severely damaged capsule detachment mechanism, making ejection impossible. Will make every effort to find another means of accomplishing your son's return. Terry! See the little boy playing beneath a maple tree, moving his tiny cars up and down the tiny streets of his make-believe village. The little boy, his fuzz of hair gold in the sunlight, his cherub cheeks pink in the summer wind. Terry! Up the lane the blue-denimed young man walks, swinging his thin tanned arms, his long legs making near grown-up strides over the sun-seared grass, the sky blue and bright behind him, the song of cicada rising and falling in the hazy September air. Terry! Probably won't get a chance to write you again before takeoff, but don't worry, Ma. The Explorer 12 is the greatest bird they ever built. Nothing short of a direct meteorite hit can hit it, and the odds are 1,000,000 to 1. Why don't they leave the stars alone? Why don't they leave the stars to God? The afternoon shadows lengthened on the lawn, and the sun grew red and swollen over the western hills. Martha fixed supper, tried to eat, and couldn't. After a while, when the light began to fade, she slipped into Terry's jacket and went outside. Slowly the sky darkened and the stars began to appear. At length her star appeared, but its swift passage blurred before her eyes. Tires crunched on the gravel then, and headlights watched the darkness from the drive. The car door slammed. Martha did not move. Please God, she thought, let it be Terry. Even though she knew it couldn't possibly be Terry. Footsteps sounded behind her, paused. Someone coughed softly. She turned then. Good evening, ma'am. She saw the circlet of stars on the grey epaulet. She saw the stern, handsome face. She saw the dark, tired eyes. And she knew. Even before he spoke again, she knew. The same meteorite that damaged the ejection mechanism, ma'am. It penetrated the capsule, too. We didn't find out till just a while ago, but there was nothing we could have done anyway. Are you all right, ma'am? Yes, I'm all right. I wanted to express my regrets personally. I know how you must feel. It's all right. We will, of course, make every effort to bring back his remains, so that he can have a fitting burial on earth. No, she said. I beg your pardon, ma'am. She raised her eyes to the patch of sky where her son had passed in his shining metal sarcophagus. Sirius blossomed there, blue-white and beautiful. She raised her eyes still higher, and beheld the vast parterre of Orion, with its central motif of vivid forget-me-nots, its far-flung blooms of Betelgeuse and Rigel, of Bellatrix and Saiph. And higher yet, and there flamed the exquisite flower-beds of Taurus and Gemini, there burgeoned the riotous wreath of the Crab, there lay the pulsing petals of the Pleiades, and down the ecliptic garden path, wafted by a stellar breeze, drifted the ochre rose of Mars. No, she said again. The general had raised his eyes too now. Slowly he lowered them. I think I understand, ma'am, and I'm glad that's the way you want it. The stars are beautiful tonight, aren't they? More beautiful than they've ever been, she said. After the general had gone, she looked up once more at the vast and variegated garden of the sky where her son lay buried. Then she turned and walked slowly back to the memoried house.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. If you like this sort of human-read narration, please consider becoming a member of the channel. Members not only get rid of some of their unwanted money, but also may access the stories a whole week before everyone else. And that's it, really. Oh yes, the stories are and will remain AI-free.
and free of charge, of course.